Hello everybody and welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. My name is Deborah Hatswell and you're listening to BBR Investigations. There's a huge summer storm going on outside, so it's an ideal time for me to sit down and share with you some reports that have come into me recently. I'm also going to share some that are the same and they span across two continents. So tonight you'll hear reports from England and you'll also hear them from America. Just this week, I was contacted by a man in Herefordshire who'd seen what many of us know as the Shimmer Man or the Glimmering Man, a creature that resembles the apex alien seen in the Predator film series. So not an enemy you can see and fight, an enemy you can't see, and that must be absolutely terrifying. I was contacted, as I say, just this week by a gentleman who lives in North Herefordshire in the UK, and he said, I've been following the Bigfoot sites with interest for a few years now. I've always thought these creatures might exist in the USA, but I've been on the fence about them being here in the UK. That was until last year, about this time. One of the things I do is I call squirrels to help the woods and the songbirds. It makes a huge difference in the woodland and it enables the small creatures to find food and habitat more easily. I have to say I agree with him. Grey squirrels are an epidemic in the UK and they are forcing out our natural species and they are seen as vermin. He said I was in the woods on this day doing just that. I was sitting concealed in my shelter and I heard a squirrel coming down the track from about 25 yards away. The breeze was quite strong that day, but I could hear him. He climbed up onto the feeder and I let him settle down to his last meal of wheat and molasses. Once he relaxed, I put the crosshairs between his eyes and got ready to pull the trigger when he picked up the next bit of food, which would give me time to make a clean kill. And he did exactly that. And as I started to put pressure on the trigger, he suddenly went down. He turned to his left, his tail bushed out to the max, and his eyes were bulging like organ stops. He was frozen solid. What had caused this sudden change of stance and attitude? He was terrified of something. Was it a fox or a human, maybe? It then dawned on me that it had gone deadly quiet. And I mean quiet. There was no noise at all. Our witness said, I have tinnitus and I couldn't even hear the whistling that haunts me all of the time. Now, I've heard this a few times about this deathly silence that can happen, he said, and it happens at the drop of the hat. But I always believed that it happened in the USA, not here in the UK. He said, I very slowly peered around the corner of the hatch, fully expecting to see a reasonable explanation for the squirrel's behaviour. But I saw nothing. There was not a thing to be seen. But as I reached the maximum view of the wood, I noticed movement. Only very slight, but a definite movement. But there was nothing there. I was bewildered for a couple of seconds, but as I focused on the point of interest, I saw something. And it was just like the Predator from the Arnie film. And it was standing a mere 20 yards away. It was swaying slightly from side to side, and it was not easy to see. But it was there, and the wood was still silent. As I stood there and watched, I could make out the shape of this thing more easily. It was huge, about 8 feet tall and half as wide, with a humanoid-shaped body, and it was looking our way. I was transfixed, but I felt no fear at all, just fascination for what I was observing. I noted a scar on the tree where a branch had fallen off and healed over, which gave me a more accurate point for a height comparison. There was clear vision to it, bar a few leafy twigs, but beyond that the cover got thicker. I watched it for maybe 30 seconds, which seemed much longer at the time. It then turned and it walked 3 or 4 steps into the thicker cover and it vanished. The strides appeared to be 5 to 6 feet in length. Now that would still have left it within eyesight, but it was gone. I was still glued to the spot. I couldn't get my head around what I'd seen. I then refocused on the job that had been in hand, and I turned back to the grey squirrel. which of course was now gone. Now, there was still no noise at all, which was a bit different to the 25 yards into the wood that I could hear before I saw it. Had it gone up a tree? Had it legged it across the ground? I'd have heard it, surely. But then it clicked that it was still deadly silent. Gradually, over the next couple of minutes, the sounds all came back to normal. What had I just been part of? Now, I've worked in the woods and the country for more than 50 years of my 61 years. And during that time, you think you see things out of the corner of your eye. Or you see big cats square on, or even UFOs doing extraordinary manoeuvres in the sky. When you don't see something properly, you always believe and you put it down to an overactive imagination. I used to see these shimmer people regularly a few years back in an area a few miles away. But when you look for what caused the movement, you can't see a solid object. So you just ignore the thoughts and just brush it off. But now I am sure they're around more than we think. And if they just freeze, you won't see them. If this one had been in an open field or on a hill with a plainer background, I doubt I would ever have seen it. Now, I might be wrong here, but because it disappeared after a few strides and left no tracks to find the following day, I think that he was standing in an entrance to a portal. Could this electrical activity cause a silence that was so noticeable? He went on to add, and I know you're wondering about the big cats, and yet I've seen two myself, so I know they're out there. I saw a puma from about 100 yards away through a rifle scope, and there was no mistaking that. And I saw a black leopard from less than 6 feet away, which was being chased by my German Shepherd dog and my lurcher. This was in heavy moonlight, so I had good vision. They treed the cat, and it watched me as I walked towards it with a torch fixed on its bright green eyes. They were twice the width of the German Shepherd dog's eyes, and I measured they were probably about 31 3/4 inches the next day. I know that big cats are out there, and this is the type of chap that we have to listen to because he's out there all of the time. So he's noticing things in the woodland and he's seeing cats, then they are definitely there. And we have to accept that he's also seeing what we describe as this shimmering or glimmering being. Now, there are many reasons given for this shimmering, and I think his question about electricity is incredibly valid. Are they using the natural electricity of the earth grid to disguise themselves? Are they coming out in and out of portals through there? I don't know. Is it the hair itself that mirrors its surroundings, giving this glimmering appearance? This case reminded me of a case I know in Leominster State Forest in Massachusetts that was documented by a well-known Bigfoot investigator, Rich LeBlanc. Now, a lot of locals that grew up in the area call it Monsterland, and that goes back to the 1950s when there was a gentleman that disappeared after seeing a strange creature by Old Mill Road. Now, Rich Lee Blank grew up and lived on the outskirts of Monsterland, and as legend goes, it's also known for its flying saucers, glowing orbs, Sasquatch sightings, all of which Rick said could be connected. Rich also encountered an unforgettable creature when he was 12 years old. He had a strange encounter behind the Fallbrook Elementary School that still haunts and inspires him to this day. And he knows that the truth is out there. Rich said, before they put Somerset Middle School there was a bunch of tracks that would connect to Monsterland, that would go to the sand dunes where people would go. You would go and party, and people had reported seeing things there, UFOs, shadow people, strange beings, balls of light, you name it, Rich said. There was one particular track I always used to avoid. It always had a very dark, ominous feeling to it. It could be a beautiful day, and you'd look down this thing, and it looked dark. One day, gripping the handlebars of my blue bike, I was feeling brave, even though I was alone, and I went down this trail, said Rick. There were 2 trees on either side of the trail, and it just felt like this prehistoric gate welcomed me into this place. I started going down the trail with my bike, and I could just hear the bike squeaking. And I noticed that there were no other sounds in the forest. Nothing. It was deadly silent. I remember coming to a dead stop. I couldn't see anything on either side of me, and I started getting an uneasy feeling in my gut. So I put my feet flat on the ground, and I didn't move a muscle. At that moment, something crashed through the woods right in front of me, and I could feel it reverberating in the soles of my feet. It was pushing trees and shrubs as it went across the trail on either side. But I couldn't see anything, and that's what was the most disturbing. Like myself, this incident set Rich on a lifelong quest to prove what happened that day, and he's taken part in many investigations and spoken with many witnesses. He did have some strange experience in his days as a researcher. Personally, Rich has seen glowing, floating orbs on at least 9 occasions, including during the daytime at Doyle Field, and he believes there is a connection between the orbs and the sightings of Bigfoot. A few years back at 1 a.m., October the 21st, in Saltfort State Park in Law City, Idaho, Rich LeBlanc was with a group of experts when they saw something truly amazing. Rich said, "We saw this orange ball of light floating in the woods. I noticed it and I said, 'Guys, we've got something going on over here.' So we walked over to it. We're at the edge of the wood line. And all of a sudden, this thing splits into 2. And it looks like 2 eyes. And it's high off the ground. And it's moving around like it's part of something." We had a psychic medium with us that day, and she said, "We have a Sasquatch right in front of us." And there was a faint light from the distance coming through. And the medium said, "It's going to move, watch." And this tall shadow moved through the trees without making a sound. And I'm like, what are we dealing with? Is this just an animal? Or is it something else? Rich said, in some of the cases he's worked, there's sometimes mention of these lights or orbs. He said people have seen Bigfoot holding an orb. They look like a basketball with kind of plasma swirling around inside, and they're silent. I've just seen them hovering over the sky and just blink out and disappear. And there are a lot of different theories about Bigfoot, but the reality is something is happening. People are seeing them, and they are leaving tracks. There was a huge UFO wave in 1967 in central Massachusetts. People were seeing UFOs over ponds and lakes. And there was a lady in Fitchburg saying there are UFOs coming out of the reservoir. When Rich started researching, he found that lady. Her name was Betty Anderson. And she had this thing happen down on Howard Street, he said. And it was a ball of light, and it hit her head. And she had instant telepathy and communication with grey aliens. Other stuff was happening in these forests when we were out there. And during this time, this area was also getting a wave of Bigfoot sightings and reports that were coming into the state police. He said Betty Anderson had a terrifying encounter, happened on 25th Jan 1967, and she was abducted by extraterrestrial aliens. She lived in Ashburnham then. She also had a close encounter in 1994 in Leominster. Rich also talks about a couple in March of 1967 who saw a UFO at St. Leo Cemetery in Leominster. And in the 1970s, another couple saw a rectangular UFO with lights hovering over the hillside in Ashburnham, where that lady lives. Rich says, there was a flash of light, and all of a sudden the UFO was gone. And they looked at each other. And the wife noticed that they'd got missing time. Around 20 minutes had gone. But the other thing is that their car was on the opposite side of the road now. They were put back in the wrong place. There are many areas like this in the world where lots of strange activity happens over many different genres. So people will have missing time or see a UFO, they may be abducted. They might see a Bigfoot or a Dogman or a creature or like Rich And our first witness, an invisible life form, as I call them, because I don't really have another word for them. Areas of strange activity tend to have ley lines that run through them, or have a strange kind of anomaly within the electrical pattern. So it's worth looking into. I think it's a very good theory when it comes to looking to see if there is a connection between all of this phenomena that goes on in that area. Now let's come back to England and go to the Yorkshire area where our Deb lives, an area well known for Dogman and werewolf sightings that stretch back in history and are also still reported by locals and visitors to the area. I took my last report of a dogman in Yorkshire about 7 weeks ago. Recently, I received a case from a young lady, and she's been investigating on her brother's behalf. Now, she's taken it as far as she can, and I've added her to the BBR investigators, obviously, and we're going to help her work this case going forward. You will hear from me again because she's got some experiences of her own, but for now, let's listen to what happened to her brother back in 1993, we think, in Yorkshire. And the exact date this happened is not known, as it was a long time ago. But the fear that he and his friends felt and the memory of that night have never left them. That's quite clear. And when you hear it, you'll understand why. This experience happened back, we think, in 1993, Deb. My brother Chris, now in his late 40s, had left school and he'd started working. It was roughly 10 p.m. at night, and he was sitting in the front passenger seat of his friend's Citroen BX car. It was dark, as it was autumn. Sitting in the back were two girls who were talking amongst themselves. The car was parked with its back end facing the tennis courts of the park, and the front end was facing the car park. For context, behind the tennis courts there was a playground, and a path that led past the tennis courts from the playground to where we were parked up. And there's a trail line that hugs the park. It's the main line GNER for King's Cross to Leeds. The track is high up on a steep embankment, covered in bushes and trees. My brother's friend was a lad that was a couple of years younger than him, and suddenly my brother heard screaming from the back of the car. One of the girls was screaming, "No, no, go away, go away." He looked through the rearview mirror and he could see something leaning on the back window. It was fully leaned across the back window, looking into the car at them. Its arms were extended, with its palms, arms, face, and flat body resting across the window of the car. Chris could see it in the wing mirror of his side of the car, and it was standing on the ground, leaning across the window. It had animal hair all over its body and head. He said it was not a man dressed in an animal suit. He didn't know what it was, but it wasn't a human. Its hair was matted, and he couldn't say what it was. He doesn't know. He could not see any eyes or any other features, but it did have ears like a dog, and it was black in colour. At that point, the girl screamed, "Drive, drive," and his friend drove, accelerating out of the park. It didn't follow them, and they didn't see it again. The girls were really upset about what happened, and he didn't see them for about a month after that. But when he did, they refused to talk about it. They were so scared. He also never discussed it with his friend, who was the driver of the car, and then they fell out. He always felt uncomfortable when going anywhere near that park. He had a constant feeling of being watched, and a feeling very uncomfortable even all these years later. This place is called Snow Hill Beckdeb. It runs on the northeast side of Wakefield under the embankment, and it resurfaces through a man-made culvert at the edge of the park. The tunnel runs all the way under the embankment and the railway track, but you couldn't get through to the other side because there were bars blocking it. Today, the tunnel entrance in the park is blocked by bars as well, but at the time it was open and accessible. My brother remembers going through the tunnel with friends, and there were holes in the walls at intervals where candles could be placed. He's 6'3", and he had to crouch down and shuffle through there. At the time of this incident, the playground was next to the embankment and this tunnel. The tunnel was known as the Devil's Archway. And when we used to hang out in the playground, we found the tunnel very unnerving. The playground's no longer there. A new one's been built at the entrance of the park. The beck flows out of the tunnel, and out at the bottom end of Wrenthorpe Park. On the other side of the beck are thick trees, and further along the beginning of the nature reserve that stretches from Wrenthorpe all the way over to Alberthorpe. The nature reserve is called Alberthorpe Meadows, and at the time of this sighting there were far less houses, and there was a long wide corridor of waste kind of wildland that ran all the way from central Wakefield. There's another beck there called Barn Beck, and that flows into the city centre. He believes, and I also believe, that they are using these corridors, as we call them, to move around. You know, there's lots of deer out there, there's lots of animals, there's so many things. You stick close to the water, you can go anywhere you want. Our witness went on. What I didn't realise before I began this was how many small to moderate sized waterways there are all over Wakefield. Because as we go about on the roads and the pavements, we just don't see them. They're so well hidden. He said, I remember sitting in the classroom at my junior school, looking across the land at this church which stands overlooking the city. It's quite an imposing looking church with a good sized cemetery, and it's on the edge of 52 acres of meadowland that make up the corridor between Alberthorpe and Wrenthorpe, and that leads to the junction 41 of the M1. That playground was not there in the 90s, Deb. Can you imagine being in that car and having that happen to you? I've worked on cases of other people where they've been in a car and something has come out of the woodlands and walked through the snow, leaving footprints. They got all the way to the back of the car and there was nothing there. There was nothing to see leaving those footprints. That report came from Yorkshire. There's another report of a thing in a quarry that comes up the side towards two lads. That happened in Yorkshire. There's something going on with Yorkshire and I don't really know what it is. But it's not just Yorkshire when it comes to the UK. Many of you will know my good friend Andy, Handy Codes. He does 12th Dimension, his own podcast, and you'll find a link to it below. He had an experience one morning, and that's how me and him met. He actually contacted me after he saw what he described as this movement of energy. His actual words were, it was something similar to the invisible predator in the film. It was this swirling, moving enigma. Andy did a double take and they were still there. They went up a tree like invisible monkeys. I give him his due. He went back a couple of days later to make sure it wasn't the rain, it wasn't, something glinting off. There was nothing that could account for this thing that he saw. And I remember him saying to me, I don't know if it was several things moving up the tree, Deb, or just one incredibly large one, which is absolutely spine tingling, isn't it? One lady named Mrs. Huff was walking to work one morning in Durham, only 2019. When she was walking down Quarry Head Lane, it's a small lane, skirts the kind of where the cathedral and the castle are, and there's a lot of tall trees there. And she said, on this particular morning, it was mid-October, I walked past the majority of the trees. I was just approaching the edge of the wooded area when something caught my eye. Up in that tree, on the other side of the road, one of the lower branches was waving about, as though something was moving around on it, but there was nothing there. And then I saw what I can only describe in my head as a prismatic thing. It was almost like reflecting light. It was split into panes of rainbow colours, just like the light off a cut diamond or one of those old-fashioned prisms. And it was the movement of the light that caught my attention. She said when it wasn't reflecting the light, it was completely see-through. And I could definitely see the leaves through it. She had no idea what it was. She said, I'm used to seeing squirrels and things like that in the trees. It was nothing like that. And it was definitely bigger, probably about the size of a large cat. Now, Judy's husband is a well-known paranormal investigator, Chris Huff. And he does an amazing amount of investigations. And one of them was done at Woodhill Spa, which is in Lincolnshire. And he said every time he'd gone there, he'd experienced a very uncomfortable feeling of being watched, of not being welcome, and even at times of feeling threatened. Now, if you're on the Ostlers plantation, he said, if you go early evening, this is when you get it. And his friend Glenn has a two-man dog team. And he said he got to a certain point in the crossroads of the tracks through the woods when one of his dogs, Mika, reacted violently to something unseen. And whatever that was, it was attacking her. It was physically biting her and attacking her. And obviously the sled came to an abrupt stop and threw Glenn off, onto the ground. It said Glenn watched as Mika was on her back on the ground. She was howling and whining as though something was on her, attacking her. And at this point, Blade, the bigger dog, stepped in and stood over Mika. He's on guard, his hackles are up and raised, and he's snarling, which seemed to cause whatever it was to retreat to a nearby tree. And that Blade stood over her, he said, with his hackles raised, and he was snarling, staring at a point about 8 foot up in this tree. Glenn didn't see anything, and he eventually managed to get the sled in order and get the dogs out of there. But he described this dog being attacked by an invisible predator. Now, I've taken reports of these predator-like beings from all across the globe. The UK does have several reports, and so does the US. And I received an email from America in 2018 from a man called Daniel Velasquez, who saw a predator-like being as he was driving on a US highway. He called it the Glimmer Man, and he said, "I'm 40 years old, and my name's Daniel Velasquez. I'm a construction worker in Seattle, Washington. And this is the first time that I've contacted your show. I had to respond to the Glimmer Man episode that you did recently. I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to tune into your show. I want to share with you my own experience with the predator being, as y'all have named it, the Glimmer Man. Until now, I thought that maybe I was going crazy. This is the first and only experience I've ever had with anything paranormal or otherworldly. It was a very brief encounter, but I know what I saw, and this has made me question everything that I know." This happened in late August 2018. I was riding in the passenger seat in our work truck with my boss, who was driving, and another worker sitting in the back. We were on our way to a job site in Seattle, and we were exiting the I-5 freeway, which is the main interstate between Canada down to Mexico. As we were exiting the freeway, I was just sitting back in my seat, and I looked to the right, and I saw this thing, this predator figure moving to its right. I jumped up and said to my boss, "Oh my God, can you see that? Look!" I was absolutely stunned. There was a little outcropping of trees, and beyond that, there were about 3 or 4 homeless people just going about their business. And they seemed to be clueless about the figure that was walking about 20 yards in front of them. I was absolutely shocked, and I did not know what to say or do. I only saw the figure for about 4 or 5 seconds, and when I turned to my boss to ask if he was seeing this, he then turned back to where I saw the figure. It was gone. I lost sight of it. And it was exactly like the predator figure in the movie. Not the alien form, but the form when it's cloaked. In my 40 years, I've never seen anything like that. My wife is the only person that I've told because I don't want people to think that I'm crazy. I was so glad to hear your show about the Glimmer Man. You mentioned that you had other people or stories about the same thing, Deb. Please do a follow-up on this story. It's something I need. It's somewhat comforting to know that there have been other sightings and that I'm not crazy. He said also, have there been any similar sightings in Seattle or Washington State area? I would really love to know about them. Thanks, Daniel Velasquez. I was never able to find anybody for Daniel to speak to, actually, in Washington State or Seattle. I did a really tiny channel back then. I think now maybe the reason I've run this story again is so that someone will come forward, hopefully, or at least know of other reports in the United States that I can share with him. So as you can see here tonight, it doesn't matter what country you live in, what status symbol you have, what car you drive, what your hobbies are, what you eat, where you go, it doesn't matter. Everybody sees these strange, what do I call them? Beings, creatures, life forms, I don't know. It doesn't seem to have a witness space. Same as Bigfoot, same as the UFO world, same as the paranormal world. Ordinary people see impossible things every single day. One of the most frightening, I think. I mean, here's my fright list, right? Bigfoot, Dogman, humanoid creatures, and then something invisible that can get within 3 inches of me, no matter where I am, that could take me out in a heartbeat. That's terrifying. And considering with the reports I deal with, if it's in my top 5, then believe me, it's spooky. Yeah. But as I say, they've been reported everywhere. It doesn't even matter where you live. They've been seen right close to urban settings and people's homes. Daniel said there was homeless people living in a camp. They didn't even know this thing was 20 feet in front of them. So if we're dealing with a being that can reflect back its surroundings at will, it can merge with its habitat and blend in so well that you can't see it. How are we supposed to avoid that? I can give all the advice in the world, but I can't fight an invisible being that can terrify at will. I don't even know what to call them. So I refer to them as invisible life forms. I don't know much about them or how they do this, but I do know the sightings of them are on the increase. More and more people are reporting them, and no doubt some of you will be future witnesses when you think about it. So stay safe when you're out there. Take some easy precautions. Let people know where you're going and what time you intend coming back. Simple things like that can really, really help. And if you're worried and you're in an area and it doesn't feel right, leave. Listen to your gut instinct and leave. Cryptid reports are at a all-time high, regardless of the country you live in. UFO reports are the same. Paranormal reports are the same. Missing people is at an all-time high. We need to be really careful out there, folks. I'm doing everything I can to spread the message of this, and as are other YouTubers and other investigators, because it's what we need to do. It's our responsibility. We bring these stories to you. You really need to be safe when you're out there. Keep your safety your number one priority. Thank you for joining me tonight. If you enjoy my podcast, there are lots of options to hear the reports as they come in. If you're a patron or a YouTube member, you'll get them early. You'll also see exclusive content before it's made public. So check out the links in the description below. You don't have to become a patron or pay money to see the posts. They're over there on Patreon for free, publicly. I don't think people realise that sometimes. And my podcast goes out on every one of your favourite podcasts. Do me a massive favour. Share it with your friends or on your social media. YouTube are getting really, really clever at shutting channels like mine down, and I have a feeling it's not going to be too long for me. The only reason that'll stop that if that algorithm keeps putting me up in the numbers. That's how it works, unfortunately. But as the storm goes on outside, I hope you all have a wonderful week. I will be back next week at the same time, on the same day, with another show from the BBR Case Files. Good night, everyone.